look, I didn't internalize a lot of this stuff the same way that some people did. I don't actually feel like I have a lot of religious harm done to me. I got the same message. I just, for some reason, like certain parts of it didn't sink in the same way, and I connected
You know
to
why?
it differently.
Because you're rocky soil.
Yeah.
The seed fell on the hard ground, and no fruit could spring up. I was fertile soil, man. I was going to bring forth 100-fold.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Growing Up Christian. I'm Sam.
And I'm Casey.
And I binge listened to a podcast this week called Gangster Capitalism. And I feel like a lot of people are getting, like, the word's been getting out on that, but for anyone who doesn't know, like, the podcast, they're on season 3, right? But they did what was it? I don't actually even remember what the first 2 seasons were on. One of them was the NRA, and I think one of them had to do with like something to do with colleges and lending, maybe.
Like the scandal with the Hollywood elites where they were paying to get their kids into the Ivy League colleges.
It might have been that. But season 3 is what, like, I didn't even heard of Gangster Capitalism until season 3 started coming out, and it was entirely on Jerry Jr. and his like misdealings at Liberty University and his sexcapades and things of that nature. And I
just Liberty in general.
Yeah. Dude, that shit blew me away. Like, so I think it was like airing like once a week, and it was only like 8 episodes. It wasn't long. There's a shit ton of information packed into it, but I came into it kind of shortly after the series ended. The series like ended just a little while ago. So I was able to listen to the entire season, and I don't listen to a ton of podcasts these days. I used to listen to a lot. I used to commute to work like pre-pandemic. It was a little over an hour commute every day, 5 days a week, a little over an hour in, a little over an hour back. I might get one in while I'm listening, like while I'm working. And since then, like since the pandemic and I'm mostly remote, like I just don't listen to a lot anymore. I'm like, I have to actively decide which ones I'm going to listen to and get through. And I listened to the whole season in like 3 days. I just could not turn that shit off. I didn't watch TV at night. I was just like sat on the couch and listened to Gangster Capitalism season 3 because, go ahead. You got something to say.
I'm 3 episodes in.
Okay.
And it's especially interesting because it touches a lot of the time when we were at Liberty.
Yeah.
And like you're hearing names and stuff that you recognize and maybe not, there were some of them like Ron Godwin came up and I'm like, oh, the goat man.
Yeah. He had that gnarly goatee.
He definitely looked like a billy goat. Like I could see him like chewing on a can or something like that, But it's interesting. There's just like so many things that like when you hear about it from these people who had firsthand experiences with it, like the first episode starts off with this lady describing like trying to wine and dine the Falwells in order to like get some support for a nonprofit that she was organizing and trying to get going and stuff. So they get completely sloshed at this fancy restaurant and they're just the worst. They're like the absolute worst, like rude to the staff, like screaming at people, chewing them out because they wouldn't give them more alcohol because they were closing the place down, and like helping themselves to other people's drinks and stuff like that at the table. And then Jerry Jr. disappears with people like
after he motorboats somebody publicly.
Yeah. And someone takes a picture, and Mrs. Jerry Jr. starts like reaming him out, like, you better get that off that phone. Everything about it is just like, oh, these are the people that they're just that we wondered if they were, They're terrible. and it's pretty interesting until the episode that I'm on now.
Season 3 is a fucking nightmare to get.
It's all about.
No, I said season 3, didn't I? Episode 3.
Episode 3. It's called like Protecting the Brand, and it's about. It deals with like assault and sexual misconduct and stuff on campus, rape, and how the campus and the school handled those things and stuff. And it is abysmally dark. It's horrible. And the things that they're talking about, the cases that they're discussing, and it's like firsthand accounts from people that it happened to, were while we were at Liberty. Like we were there while this was happening, had no idea.
Yeah. And no joke, dude. I was listening to that episode on my drive home from work, and I was actually yelling at my fucking radio. And there were parts of that just made me choke up, like start crying. I was like, Jesus fucking Christ. I cannot believe. Like, it's not just like it's not like someone, I don't mean this to sound like shitty, but it's not like somebody walks into the office and is like, I was sexually assaulted, and then they're like, okay, and then they had no. This sounds really shitty, and I don't know if I should even continue talking, but it's not like someone just walked in, was like, there's no way to tell either way. It's like these were like clear cut, obvious situations of
corroborated accounts,
very much so, that they intentionally tried to sweep under the rug and prevent people from talking about. And like, it wasn't like someone came in and said something and they're like, we need to investigate this further. And then it was like, well, it's really hard to come up with a conclusion. Like, it was not that Liberty is interested in investigating anything further. And if that were the case, that would be the right response, but they chose not to. And then in situations where it was cut and dry, obvious assault, they just were like, they did everything in their power to convince people to not say shit. I mean, they did everything they could to keep it hidden. And it's truly horrible. And if you, that's the hardest episode to get through. And they put all that into one. So like, just when you get through that, it's, I hate to say entertaining afterwards, but listening to how shitty Jerry and Becky are is kind of entertaining. It's validating. I think that's what it is. You're like, when you hear stories come out about how shitty people are, you're like, you want to hear more. Like, I ate that shit up, dude. I could not stop listening.
Yeah. And to give you an example, and if you're not familiar with Liberty or the series and you're wondering like, well, why would they do that? And Liberty actively promoted the notion that they were the safest campus in, I don't know if it's the East Coast or Virginia or whatever. Like that was US. Part of their marketing. And in order to keep the statistics looking good, they actively suppressed allegations of sexual assault and violence and all sorts of different things. To give you an example, of how awful this was and the ramifications of this kind of policy, a woman made a report. She was assaulted by this kid who was a football player, who is now serving like consecutive life sentences for murdering and assaulting 2 college girls. Yeah, I mean,
it's fucked.
He was accused of sexual assault, and basically they like suppressed the account from the victim. Like literally, because they make it
played sports because they didn't. I mean, wasn't that it? Wasn't it like he played for Liberty, and they're like, well, it was in their best interest.
We don't want that headline.
Yeah, jeez,
exactly. Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's so disgusting, and I don't know. I was, April and I were sitting around trying to figure out how to make sense of the policy. Obviously, there's like the marketing side of it. We're protecting the brand. But I think part of it is just the fact that like this community of people is like 30 years behind current society and how they look at those types of things. Like victim blaming and all of that kind of stuff. Like they are just lagging like 3 decades behind the rest of the public on how they view those things and how they handle them. And people suffer as a result. People die as a result.
But what's really fucked up, dude, is that it's not like they don't it's not like they're just like when you talk to your grandpa who just doesn't understand that you shouldn't say certain words anymore. Like it's like it's not even that. It's that they're just 30 years behind on how to deal with it. They know how to deal with it, and they're intentionally acting 30 years behind on it, right? So like it obviously comes down to protecting a brand, but I mean they talk to a group of people who research the type, like I mean basically assaults and sexual assaults on campuses and what are safe universities versus less safe universities. And fact is, as we know, like anyone with experience within Christianity at this point who doesn't keep their head buried in the sand is that the problems in society that Christianity pretends that they've insulated themselves from are equally, if not more so, represented within them. They're just kept quiet. So, like sexual assault, abuse, anything like that, that is all very much at least equally represented in churches as it is in the outside world, showing you that people are generally the same everywhere and that maybe the power of Christ isn't compelling them as much as they say they are, as much as they say it is. But what you're getting is like this group of people that they talk to who researches it is like, you're saying when they're reporting such like low numbers of assault, it really comes down to that is a red flag. Like anyone that's reporting things that low and saying that their campus is that safe, they know just from studying humanity that it's not that low anywhere. Anywhere in the fucking globe, it's not that low. So when Liberty's like, we're practically nothing, they are like, bull fucking shit. And you should have reason to believe that they're probably a more dangerous place to be because they're actively covering it up and not doing anything to prevent it. And that was, I mean, I remember stories when we were there about stuff like that happening. I mean, I remember people talking about like there was rumors of a rape, and I remember I don't know if it was like right before we got there. I mean, it was when I was in the dorm, so it would have been like that was my first year there, so it probably would have been like a year or two prior. But the fact that there were only rumors and you couldn't actually like, there's no real story behind it, that there was nothing to find. Like it was just people saying they heard this thing. Like those shouldn't be rumors. Like if that's a rumor and everyone knows about it, then that should be an official report, and it wasn't. And we were just, even at that time in my life, I was just like, oh, it is what it is, I guess. How can you prove it? Like, I don't know. I would have been equally a part of the problem at that point in my life, and not thinking there was anything you could really do about it.
Well, it's like when you listen to stuff about like serial killers, and they'll talk about like the Milwaukee Police Department during the time when Jeffrey Dahmer was, he was preying on young men in these gay bars and things like that. All sorts of different spots where there was enough of this going on that they knew that something was happening, that someone was preying on this community of people. And, the Milwaukee Police Department were like highly criticized for how flippantly they handled this case and stuff like that. I think sometimes it's that. I think in this case, bureaucracy just protects itself. That's just a natural inclination. I mean, an organism, whether it's one person or, millions of people, it protects itself in ways that are not always good for the community as a whole. And, I same thing. Like I remember times where there was rumors going around campus about, I remember there was a rumor at one point of like, somebody trying to pull a young woman into a car that was walking on campus at night. And you could not find anything. It's not like I was actively looking for information about it, but like it was always just rumors. Like there was no announcement. There was no, hey, we've had reports of this going on. We need everybody to be aware and be careful. And like, young women, if you have to go somewhere at night, like be aware of this and maybe have somebody with you. Like nothing. There's nothing like that. There's no warning. There's no anything, because it's not good for the image of the department. Yeah. And the same thing happens in, big government bureaucracies. The same thing happens at corporations. but it's especially egregious when it's coming from an institution that just blathers on all the time about the lack of morality in society. And
No fucking shit, right?
especially when you're talking about like violence and anything of a sexual nature, like that's the favorite subject. And for them to like
sexual perversion is like their go-to. Oh, it's a perversion of what God created. Like that's literally what you stand for, is perversion at this point.
To do nothing to help protect like the students and the faculty and things like that from these situations. There's other things that come up in the series about sexual misconduct, like within, towards staff members. There's one guy specifically that's mentioned by name that has a huge amount of like accusations against him of sexual misconduct, of, impropriety and things like that within the office. And Liberty has just like continually moved him around to different positions. Like he'll get reprimanded quietly, like not publicly, but like they demoted him to a different office. But then later on, they promoted him from that position to a different, like he's a VP of something else. And that's another aspect of this that I'm hoping that they get into. Like I've heard from people who worked at Liberty that there's all these, it's like a good old boys club and everybody's a VP of something.
Oh, yeah.
And basically has no responsibilities and they're either just drawing a check from the school.
Yeah, and just like handing out orders. I mean, I worked there for a number of years and everyone that I worked with was just like, you knew the people at the top. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy that was like a big wig who was like, oh yeah, I'm friends with Jerry. If I knew his name, I'd fucking say it. It's just slipping my mind. I have no interest in protecting him. But it was, he was one of those same characters where it's just like, this guy, like he exhibited absolutely zero, whatever like Christian principles were, what you'd expect from someone who called himself a Christian, what we were taught about what that meant to be in church. This guy reflected absolutely none of those principles at all. He was just a dick. He was a fucking dick. And he loved being in charge and telling people what to do and treating people like trash. And I knew like my boss at that time was like, I mean, he's okay. Like, but the only reason he said that is because his hope was to like climb that ladder, right? He wanted to be one of those people that got to sit around and do nothing and tell people what to do, which is arguably what he did when he was my boss, but he wanted to just get paid more to do it. And, but that was it. I mean, people talked about how awful it was. I mean, the amount of rumors and conversations that I was part of with like the lower people on the totem pole of that hierarchy there was just like, oh yeah, you just like ate shit for a little while. And most people did it because they got free school. That was why I did it. They have a way of like keeping you, they have a lot of ways of like just keeping you in, and they have a way where like you just can't do anything. You can't say anything. You can't do anything. You're just like, fuck it. I'm going to eat this shit that they hand me, and I'm going to get my free degree, and I'm going to bounce. Then you have assholes like me that got a religion degree, a Bible degree. So I gave them a lot of my time for very little money. I think I started, dude, when I started there, I made $5.55 an hour.
That's what April made working in the IT department. Like,
I'm not old enough to have a story about how I made that little that at that point in my life. I don't feel old enough to have that story. Like when our parents are like, I made 45 cents an hour when I was 14 years old working on a farm. You're like, okay, that checks out.
Remember when a Snickers bar cost a nickel?
Yeah, no. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Do not.
But, dude, I started out part-time. I worked 20 hours. I was in school. I worked 20 hours a week, making $5.55 an hour, and somehow managed to not starve to death.
Man, good on you, I guess.
That's a pivot.
Lots of ramen.
Yeah, that's exactly what I ate a lot of. But we pivoted from something serious to this. Look, we don't need to rehash the entire podcast for you. We've been talking about it for a little while now. Gangster capitalism, it's incredible. If you are interested in this at all, check out season 3. I mean, I absolutely loved it. I learned as someone who went there and as Casey and I are like obviously invested in a lot of this kind of shit since we're, doing a podcast about it. But like, I thought I really had a good idea what was going on. I read the article that came out when the pool boy story broke. I paid attention, but the deep dive that they do into like the relationships between the people who are promoted, who was in charge of HR, how they suppress stuff. It's truly incredible. It's true investigative journalism, and you should definitely check it out. And friend of the show, Luke Wilson, makes an appearance in it too with his story about what it was like being part of gay conversion therapy. So can hear him. He
said it's cool.
The podcast is incredible as it is. I'm going to go ahead and say I think the only funny part about it is just Luke Wilson. He cracks jokes, and I was like, I found myself laughing at it. I messaged him after I listened to it because I was like, dude, this show is obviously serious and deals with some fucked up shit. And the only time I laughed at it was when you were making jokes about gay conversion therapy.
I'm very excited to get to the at Luke Slam Dunk Wilson section. So, okay, speaking of impropriety, we have to talk about. I'm gonna have trouble pronouncing this. I don't know what this word is, but Monsignor. What is that? Is that a title?
Monsignor?
I don't know. Let's just say
Monsignor. Isn't it Monsignor?
No clue. Let's just say Father Jeffrey Burrell. We got to talk about this guy because he is making headlines this week, and I imagine he's not having a great time doing it.
It is the title of various senior Roman Catholic positions, such as a prelate or an officer of the papal court.
Well, he's not that anymore because he resigned Tuesday as the General Secretary of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops because he was allegedly tracked on Grindr, apparently frequented gay bars and different things like that, which would be fine. We would say, congratulations, Father, you get to live your best life now and be done with all of that. And still, you can still keep your beliefs and everything. That would be great. But this guy, Jeffrey Burrell, was a big part of the movement that of Catholic bishops and stuff that wanted to block President Biden from taking communion. What do they call that?
The Eucharist?
The Eucharist. Okay. Is that
I'm disappointed
right?
in you. Yeah, I'm disappointed in you, Casey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not a religion scholar like other people.
A lot of non-denominational, whatever the fuck churches we were part of, we'll call it the Eucharist.
Did you learn that in apologetics class when you learned about how crappy it was?
No, I learned apologetics when I was trying to prove that the bread and the wine literally turn into the body and blood of Christ using physics.
I'll believe that if I get to actually take a bite out of him.
Yeah. Side note, Liberty University absolutely did not teach that. They would have taught that was some sort of heresy and that's why Catholics go to hell because they think things wrong.
And they would have spent a lot of time explaining why, when in fact it's just a ridiculous subject to talk about. But Father Jeff was one of the people who was really vocal about the fact that he didn't think President Biden should be able to take the Eucharist because of his pro-abortion stances. They tried to block it.
Pro-abortion. Pro-life.
I don't know. Biden's still a politician at the end of the day. I don't know how serious he is about his Catholicism, but I mean,
I'm not entirely sure how much he knows about what's going on in general at any point in time. Anyway,
I have serious doubts about whether he could spell Catholicism at the moment.
I think 10 years ago he was a devout Catholic. I think now he might be a devout whatever he's thinking at the time is anything, and he might not even be quite aware of what's going on where he's at. But that's just one take. Don't worry. I
have a feeling like if you asked him about it, he would probably lean real close to the mic and be like, I've been a Cadillac for a lot of years, man.
He might put his hand on the small of your back and make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up while he whispers it into your ear. But
he would definitely sniff Father Jeff's hair. But yeah, so this guy is a vocal participant in the quote unquote culture war that really sought to diminish President Biden in all sorts of different ways. And as it turns out, is yet another example of just the ridiculously blatant hypocrisy present in the Catholic. Why is anybody a Catholic at this point? It's not fun. Like, I guess if it's just a community group that you've been going to forever, or if it's your elderly mom or grandmother, I understand why people are Catholics. But like, I don't understand anybody starting to be a Catholic. Like,
that's a thing though, man. A lot of ex-evangelicals are like, I'm Catholic now.
really?
Yeah, it's not uncommon, dude. I mean, you're probably talking to like at least 10% of the people that are listening to this right now.
You know what I love is formality. That's what I was missing in my life. I'm going to be a Catholic.
Look, it's like it's like when that raging addict finds Jesus and turns into like a super fundamentalist because they like want that structure. It's like, we just sang worship songs all willy nilly. I don't want to do that anymore. I need. I mean, and it's funny because I know people who have drifted into like the high church traditions too. Not necessarily Catholic, but that like, they're like, I appreciate the reverence of it, whatever. Look, I mean, you can do the high church tradition. You don't necessarily have to be Catholic. There's obviously a lot of problems going on in the Catholic Church. But as somebody who maintained having a form of faith, there are aspects and traditions within Christianity that I think the evangelical church totally abandoned at a cost, simply because they're like, ew, gross, that's Catholic. But I still can't go into like a Catholic church or any form of high church where they just like walk around like waving that incense lamp and doing their homilies and you stand and you sit. Like, I just don't like that. That literally means nothing to me. Like, I struggle to find a feeling of meaning even within whatever it is I'm still a part of. Like, it doesn't always mean anything to me. I go and I like it, but for different reasons. It doesn't even like taking the Eucharist or whatever, doing communion. I'm like, I don't do that and then be like, I felt something special happen and that's why I like this. I'm like, this is just something I do and I don't really feel much about it. So like, when I don't understand really that drift into like people who grew up like us who are like, that was fine, but what I would like to do is just sit there and not really know what's going on for 45 minutes.
Maybe we have internalized anti-Catholicism.
Maybe.
That could be. Maybe I'm being a douchebag about it. If engaging, if jumping into Catholicism makes you happy and fulfilled, then by all means, you do you, bro. But don't be a Father Jeff about it. That's all I'm saying. So, let's introduce our guests for this week, because this was a fun episode. This one we had a great time.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
So
okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
1, 2, 3. All right. We are where Micah Murray. I don't really know where to start about how I knew who he was. I learned who he was 6-7 years ago when I had started doing the whole faith deconstruction thing, whatever. And I subscribed to his blog, and that was it. He started that whole, like, he had written some things that were super meaningful to me, where it was the first time I heard something coming from a new perspective. I was just like, holy shit, that makes sense. And as I mentioned, when we talked to him, I don't remember anything about that. I don't remember what it was. I just remember it being part of my trajectory, right? So I stopped paying, because, I subscribed to his blog, would get an email. I don't know if he really kept up with it. I really lost any knowledge of him or what he was doing or what was going on for a number of years. And then I jump on Twitter after we start the podcast, and he's somebody that I follow. And he had made this shift from progressive Christian to atheist who's going to seminary. And I had clearly missed a lot. So being able to like talk to him about what was going on and like how he kind of like to bridge that gap to hear where he's coming from was a lot of fun. Micah is very smart. He has a lot of thoughts in his head, and he will say things very fast, and he will be fun with it. Like, this was an exceptionally fun episode. He was a very fun person to talk to, and I'm super excited to just put this one out there. We've been looking forward to putting it out there since we recorded it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, if you could leave us a review on iTunes. Don't forget that we got the Discord, links in social media. Join us there. And just stay tuned. We got some cool guests coming up. We've done a couple of episodes recently, including this one that we were just really excited to put out. So I think you're gonna have some fun with them. Again, Gangster Capitalism Season 3, if you're interested. Otherwise, enjoy our conversation with Micah Murray.
Hey, everybody. We're back with our guest, Micah. Micah, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing really good. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So, okay. There's a lot of ground I want to cover because I've been following. So for the listeners, I paid attention to your work for a while, and I mentioned this to you in a message. And then like, I just stopped paying attention to blogs, and I didn't do Twitter, and I didn't really just do any of that stuff. So there's like this big gap in what I knew of you then, and then jumping back into that stuff, seeing kind of where you're at now. And I'm just like, oh, holy shit. Seems like a lot of interesting things happened in this like few year time span.
It's like, to make a long story short, wait, you got to go back and fill that in. It's like, I love Jesus, and to make a long story short, I'm an atheist theologian. What?
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably about how it went.
So did you start out on Patheos? Is that where you were too?
I was never on Patheos.
How did I find your stuff?
I don't know. I used to be like in the Christian blogging scene, and Rachel Held Evans read some of my stuff, and then she was always very generous with sharing her platform, and I got to give credit to her. Like, she kind of was the one who put me out, and I was like, hey, Micah's a good writer. And Sarah Bessie also was like, recruited me to write for Deeper Story, and was like, we need a good like semi-Calvinist, more conservative voice to round out the team, and we choose you. And that lasted like a month, and then I somehow just become the resident heretic everywhere I go, which is fine. It's much more fun than being a conservative Calvinist voice on a team.
Yeah, well, we have plenty of those now, so definitely heretic's more fun, and you get to watch people squirm, and that's always nice. So I didn't actually realize that you would start out at that point, but so I do not remember for the life of me. And I even tried finding it, and, there's a lot of stuff on the internet. So, it's not always easy to dig stuff up as much as, it can happen if you start running for political office or something. People can dig shit up on you pretty quick. But you had written something, and it was one of the first like I found you when you started shifting into like the progressive kind of Christianity thing, because you had written something that really resonated with me, and I don't remember what it was, but I remember that was like one of those first shifts in thought. That was like, oh, maybe there's a different way to look at this. Yeah. So what was your experience, and what happened that made you shift into even thinking, going from Calvinism to that seemingly fairly quickly?
Well, I was never really a Calvinist, but I was at a school in my undergrad and kind of in a church that was of that scene with like John Piper and those folks were pretty influential. So that was just kind of the default theology that I was swimming in and kind of responding to in my early days of blogging. But it just never felt right. It always felt like there was this glitch between what we said was true about a God who was love, and then what our theology taught about the way that salvation worked and hell worked and punishment for sin and all this stuff. And it was just, I tried really, really hard to believe it, but I also needed to understand it in order to believe it. Like, I didn't need to understand all of it, but it it had to make like some sense. And trying to make sense of it, it just became more and more incoherent. And so I started shifting away from that set of theology because I found that like a more progressive, less biblical literalist, kind of a universal salvation kind of theology, it, it kind of made sense of some of the questions of like, why doesn't God save everyone? And, you know, why why do we have all these conflicts in our doctrine? I was able to kind of get to a place where it wasn't quite as dissonant. Um, but then the problem was I just kept kind of looking for uh, uh, the thread of truth, and I just kept finding made up stuff, and that's kind of why I passed through progressive Christianity and eventually away from Christianity altogether. Was, you know, people say, oh, it's because you were hurt, or oh, you just mad at the church, or mad at your dad, or you know, you don't know the right Jesus, whatever. And you know, that's fine, but I think really I just wanted to not feel like I was lying when I say I believe. And I got to a point where whenever I said that I believed that God is love, or I believe that Jesus is saving the world or whatever, it was like, that's a great story, bro, but you know that's made up, right? Like inside my own head. I I couldn't I couldn't say that I had any good reason to believe it other than because I really, really wanted it to be true, which I did, but that's not a good reason to believe something.
Yeah, I feel like that I had similar reservations about that stuff. Like it always bothered me. And it almost seemed like it was portrayed as a virtue to be able to just like s- squash that
Yeah.
feeling. Like
Yeah.
God kind of seems like a lifeguard that's like letting some toddlers drown and then pulling out a couple and being like, "Look at me, so merciful."
That's exactly it, dude. That is exactly it. But yeah, when you ask why, you know, in the conservative scene that I was in, it was like his ways are higher than our ways. And then when I got into progressive Christianity, it was like, well, God is really, really sad about all the toddlers that drown and really wishes they didn't. And I'm like, who made the fucking world?
You could have just not filled the pool so tall, you know?
Right. Or you could have made toddlers able to swim. Like there were a lot of options.
Handed out life preservers.
And they're like, oh no, but
You
we
could
got,
have created them with inflatable heads that
yeah,
just bob in the water, you know?
yeah.
So many options he decided not to do.
And that's what bugged me about it is like, why am I more creative than God? Right. Like, if God is supposed to be the source, and becoming a father really, it drove this home for me, because if you who are evil give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven good gifts to those who love him? And I look at the way that God treats God's children and the way I treat my children, and I'm like, one of us is a bad dad and it's not me.
Yeah, right, dude. That's definitely a big thing. Is like the shift with kids, and you when you can look at a kid and say, under absolutely zero circumstances would I ever just be like, well, you made your choice, and then just give up, like be like, oh, but now you just go burn into a fiery pit. Like you would never, never, ever, ever do anything like that. So
And
all
like,
that analogy to like
right.
God being a parent, and then you become a parent, you're like, okay, either God, if you're a Christian or you're a progressive Christian, either God's, it's like you end up having to say, okay, God's either better than this or God's not real.
Yeah, and for me, I wanted to believe in a God who was better than that, and I spent a number of years in progressive Christianity, kind of trying to rewrite the gospel that I believed in to have it be a God that was good, and a gospel that is true, and a religion that is beautiful, and Jesus who's a savior. Like I wanted it to be the very best of everything I hoped it would be. Uh, so I kind of wrote a manuscript for a book by this, and I got to the last chapter and I was like, holy shit, I'm just making shit up. Like everything is made up. Where is the tie to reality? And I remember so clearly going in and preaching this sermon, God is not an asshole. And you can go look it up on my blog from back in the day. Uh and I preached it a number of times, and I would be up there like, God is love. Like no matter what else, the God who created the universe loves you and just wants you to. And I was like, great story, bro. But like, who says? And like, how can you stake your life on that? So when I got to seminary and I was like, I don't know if I believe in Jesus or God, but I believe love is the force of the universe. And then my theology professor was like, why do you believe that? And I was like, I don't know. It sounds really, really, really cool. And all my Christian friends believe it. And then I was just like, oh shit, I have no good reason to believe this. And this is where I part ways from a lot of people of faith. It's just like, I want to be mystical. I want to be open hearted. I want to be connected to the woo woo energy of the universe, whatever. But if I have to like make stuff up and know that I'm making stuff up and pretend that I'm not making stuff up, I can't do it. I can't lie. I can't lie to a God who doesn't exist because I want that
Yeah.
God to exist.
I believe this so that I don't feel the urge to just step into traffic.
But see, here's the thing about that though. Like, it's all fucking lies because you stop believing that and you don't get the urge to step into traffic. Like, you really don't. I did a experiment on myself. It was like, let's fucking try it. Let's be an atheist and see what happens. And I feel happy. I feel free. Like the anxiety of like, am I believing the right things? Am I doing the right things? Am I making God proud? Am I living a life worth it? Kingdom of glory, blah, 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 all that stuff. Anxiety just boom, gone once you realize like, oh, that was a bunch of made up stuff and I don't have to let it cause anxiety for me all the time anymore.
They really sell the notion that like on the other side of this fence is just abysmal suffering and doubt and nothingness, like, and we've talked about it a bunch, but like they really sold the idea that like there is no life of purpose and meaning outside of Christianity. And the morality side of it too goes right along with it. I mean, how many times have you heard like,
what's keeping you from being a rapist? I was like, I don't know, what's keeping you, buddy? It's like,
I find rape unappealing, regardless of whether there's a God or not.
Right. And obviously, like, being a Christian doesn't keep you from being a sexual abuser. It just gives you a fucking system to cover it up when you get caught.
Yeah, just ask Bill Cosby. I mean,
right. Or Bill Gothard, who ran the cult that I grew up in, or any other fucking famous spiritual leader from the entire years we were growing up. And they're all like, oh, my bad. I guess there's grace for me. And then they're like, but if you stop believing in God, I bet you're going to want to do bad things with your penis. It's like, boy, leave me alone.
Yeah.
My penis is wholesome.
I love the, whenever it's like the amount of grace that's held for like people of faith in high positions when they have those big moral failings. That's like so much grace for them. Well, they,
right.
God
the devil tests them a lot and all that shit.
Yeah, it's wild because I've watched people get kicked out of church for way less than having sex with an underage kid. And then
oh my God, yeah.
A pastor's life.
Yeah.
It's wild.
All right. So you mentioned that you grew up in a cult.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that?
You're like, no, that's enough. I just wanted to throw it out there. And then
just got a little chubber there when you said cult.
Well, so I think that there's kind of two concentric layers of cults in which I was raised. And one is like fundamentalist Christianity, which isn't a cult per se, but it works like a cult because, like you said, all the branding that's like, if you leave our group, everything bad will happen for you. Don't trust outsiders. Like, we have special knowledge. No one understands you like we do. Happiness can only be found with our group. All that shit is like cult tactics 101. And that's like baked into the gospel of American fundamental Christianity. So that itself is like a cult-like religious system. But then specifically, I was in the Bill Gothard homeschooling scene that like the Duggars came out of with the big, all the kids and all that stuff. And so that was where I was educated. That's where my friends were. Like, that was my whole world until I was like 20 years old. And then when I was like 25, we found out that the leader had been fucking around with the teenage girls the whole time. And we weren't even allowed to like talk to girls our own age because spirit of purity or what, some shit. But he was like holding hands and holding other body parts and praying with them in the middle of the night. Like, this is sketchy, dude. We would have gotten kicked out for sure.
Oof.
Yeah.
Wow. What happened to the guy?
Yeah, what did happen? Did he was he held accountable for his actions?
I mean, he resigned, but he's still fucking trying to reboot his shit. It's kind of like Mark Driscoll. It's like, it's kind of like abuser whack-a-mole. You just, they resign from one board and then pop up 4 states over with a new ministry after a season of repentance.
Yeah, everybody loves a redemption story, especially when it's a
old white dude.
abusive hack. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Fallen
mean, the
pastors.
guy's like 85 years old. I have no idea how he's still alive, but I guess it's because he,
Found
followed all
favor
the
with the Lord.
He was always like, if you follow the Old Testament dietary laws, man, you'll live forever. God is super smart and the world is evil. So,
Oh man.
Oh, I love that's a particular kind of literalism that I didn't even hear. That's fun.
oh yeah,
That's new.
it was a fucking delight. It was great.
One of the things you said a little bit ago was that you like you wanted it to be true. So there's this disconnect for you for a little while where you're like, I don't know if I believe this, but I want it to be true.
Right.
What do you think? And everyone probably has their own answer for this, but what do you think made you want it to be true? Do you think it had to do with fear, conditioning? What do you think was going on there for you?
Well, I could give you the seminary answer for that because, like, what I've been reading in seminary that's fascinating is how it's like a almost universal human thing that our species does of attempting to connect with transcendent beings. Like, religion is a thing that humans started doing 10,000 years ago, and you could trace through all cultures. There's some kind of an attempt to connect to something bigger. And the theorists write books about this and they're fucking fascinating. But they're just theories, but they have they do a lot of research. And I think that it's something about us as animals. We, unlike probably most animals, although we don't know what's going on in the minds of most animals, but we know we're going to die. And everything about every organism is about survive and reproduce, right? And our organism has this very complex brain that allows us to know we're going to die. And so it doesn't feel like it just feels fucking wrong because like how can a creature live with the awareness of its own death? So I think there's kind of a thing about humans that causes us to seek comfort in the universe. We seek meaning. The way our brains make patterns and tend to try to ascribe cause and effect even when there is none. There is so much of the human mind just gives rise to the conditions that create a desire for God. C.S. Lewis said, if I find in me a desire that no earthly thing can satisfy, then I know no other conclusion that I must have been made for another world. And it's like, come on, Clive Staples. Like you can think of another hypothesis. Like another hypothesis would be something about these humans creates a longing for something which will never be fulfilled, which is fucking immortality and to have a loving, benevolent, heavenly father or heavenly parent of some sort. So I think it's all that. And then also so much conditioning because from the time of a toddler being told, like, you need to find a relationship with God if you want to have love or meaning. And so it was like, find a relationship with God at all costs, because who doesn't want to have love and meaning? Like those are essential to human survival.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think comfort is a big part of it. You think about like when the statement of like, well, God is in control, or I'm handing it over to God, or I'm putting it in his hands. Like that's always portrayed as like a show of faith and strength.
Yep.
But I think it's a comfort thing. It's like you're absolving yourself of responsibility and you're allowing yourself to believe that there's a method in the madness here.
Right.
And I feel like people rely so heavily on that comfort, to cope with the hard things in their life that are happening, beyond just death.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea that there's some eternal order and some like final justice is much easier to stomach than the idea that there's just a lot of chaos and some toddlers drown in the pool and some don't, and there's no reason why.
Yeah, I feel like we've had this. I mean, it's come up a few times for us when it comes to the like you said, there's like there's a default. The people will like resign to mystery, and it's like there's an irony to these people spending years and years writing books on systematic theology, and then when you throw a little wrench in the works, they're real quick to be like, well, God's a mystery, and we don't really understand everything about him.
Right.
And that's like the quickest way to like stay in that comfort zone, as like Casey just mentioned. So like, because obviously like we kind of had we diverged from the American fundamentalism, evangelicalism, whatever. I mean, all those words used interchangeably now. I tried to like delineate them for a little bit, fundamentalism versus evangelicalism. And of course you could say not all evangelicals are fundamentalists, but you end up wasting a lot of time trying to explain the differences. So you just have to roll with the fact that it's all pretty similar.
It's pretty similar.
And a lot of it has to do with like the buildup of like, I mean, there's Casey and I were recently talking about the difference. And so your dad, let's just shift into this real quick then. Like we were talking about the difference between like indoctrination versus like just general, like everyone's teaching their kids things. So is everyone
right.
but not everyone's indoctrinating their kids. So trying to like teach your kids the way of life and what you think is important versus a level of indoctrination that I would say we probably all think we got on some level.
Yep.
Well, I mean, how would you parse out the difference there now that you're kind of in that position of having to raise another human into this world?
I mean, I think that it's one of those things where it's about teaching your kids how to think, not what to think. Because like indoctrination is like the stakes are so high. Like if you don't believe in God, you're going to go to hell, or you're going to not belong in our religious community, or you're going to be a hypocrite, or you're not going to have a life of meaning, or you're going to have existential emptiness, or you're going to, disappoint your heavenly Father who loves you very much and took nails for you. Like whatever it is, there's all this pressure that comes with indoctrination. That's like, here's the thing that you have to believe. And I would rather say like, here's the questions that I have, and here's the answers that I'm holding tentatively to those questions. So as far as actual religious beliefs, I mean, my kids are like in elementary school, and this is something I struggle with, like figuring out like what's the right amount to teach them. But I hope that they see me looking for answers and having an open-hearted, curious position towards mystery. But what they choose to fill that with, I think, is their own journey. And that's how I think about that.
Yeah.
How great would it be if both of your guys' kids just go head first into like just super fundamentalist Mormonism? There's part of me that wishes that for Sam's kids.
Come on.
I was thinking about this the other night, and I was like, that's part of the reason why I don't want to indoctrinate my kids with what I do believe. Like, I don't want to say like, oh, it's silly to believe in God, or like, I don't want to become the opposite of what I was raised in and be like, this is the only position to have, because kids do rebel, and humans in general define themselves in contrast to the humans around them, and also in relationship, but often in contrast, and especially as kids go from like kids to adulthood. So if I'm like this adamant, like angry atheist, narrow-minded Democrat kind of character that's just the mere image of what my origin was, then I'm just going to push them back to where I came from, and that would be not smart of me. So if my kids become fundamentalist Mormons, I'll just be like, cool, but like, why would they? Because I'm not like layering them on with like shame and baggage and fucking religious trauma, which I can't speak for Mormons because I wasn't one of them, but I know for me, it was like shame was what kept me there for so long. And if you don't give kids shame, why would they be drawn to a system that's based in shame?
Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Yeah. I mean, there's that.
Well, there is that. No argument from me.
What is kind of strange though is this. I feel like there's this phenomenon that occurred with baby boomers where a lot of them like grew up Catholic, but didn't really take it seriously. Maybe there was some Catholic guilt instilled in them, but the amount of millennials whose parents got saved in their early 20s, who might not have grown up with that guilt and shame, and maybe they just like fucked a lot in the 70s and did a lot of drugs, and it's just like now they're like, but they're there. Like, I'm very fascinated by that, because that almost seems to go in contrast to like what you're saying. Your like ethos for raising kids is similar to mine. Like, don't.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Like, because our parents were raised to just like fuck a lot and do drugs, and then they all got born again and got their heads up their asses.
Yeah,
it's
weird.
So if we let our kids fuck a lot and do drugs, maybe they'll get born again and have their kids up their asses too. Yeah, no, you're right. I feel like it's a lose-lose either way. You either indoctrinate them or let them run loose. So I don't know. That's why I want to be I heard this one parenting quote it's about like being a safe place for them to land. And that's what I hope, is to build like a relationship of trust and openness with them. And then they can believe and do whatever weird shit they want. And I hope that they have enough empathy by the time they move out of my house that they don't hurt other people too much.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
I mean, like 18-year-olds are like only half baked, as far as the empathy department goes. That shit doesn't solidify to your 20s. But I think if they have empathy and I think if they have empathy, that's the one thing that I'm like, I gotta teach them that, and a sense of not shame, because so much of, and I think that's maybe a difference with our parents who did like were just running wild and then they all got born again, was like there's such a heavy component of shame that I think drives people to religion, it's a toxic religion.
It just like shows you that an omnipotent God, there's no corner he can't reach with shame.
You're really going hard into this God works in mysterious ways thing here.
I'm taking a turn back in. That's where I'm at right now.
It's absolutely true though. They're like, that was the whole method of operation, was like, if we give these kids enough fucking shame, they'll believe anything.
Yeah.
And they won't touch their penises or anybody else's penises or bodies at all. We'll just all keep our hands to ourselves and read the Bible and feel crippling shame until we're 25.
So, well, there's consequences. I mean, Sam touched his penis. You want to share your situation?
Sure. I did some yard work. Yeah. I almost started off with this, but I didn't know if it was a weird direction to take with someone we're just meeting for the first time. Did some yard work, apparently touched some poison ivy, and I have poison ivy on my dick and balls. So that's fun. I'm sitting here in a lot of discomfort. So don't touch your penis, even if you have to pee, is the moral of the story. God will be mad, and he'll give you poison ivy.
Or wash your hands before you masturbate.
Yeah, well, I was just peeing, but we can talk about masturbation too.
Okay.
I mean, we can't say for sure, but God knows.
Yeah, he does. And he watched.
I mean, we joke about it, but like, it was ridiculous. I just remember being a 15-year-old kid, and I didn't even masturbate because my dad told me not to, but I used to like think about like the swimsuit models in the JCPenney catalog, right? Just think about what I would do if I was like married to them. Right, like the most wholesome fantasies you can imagine. And I remember like going to Bible studies and just sitting there awash in shame. Like I have this like mental image burned in my mind of like a specific night. I can tell you like the house where I was, the people who were there, the couch I was on. I just remember feeling like, God, I'm so disgusting. God, I'm so disgusting, because I had like spent that day thinking, man, it'd be hot to like be married to a swimsuit model from JCPenney's in 2003.
Dude, the JCPenney catalog was where it was at.
Well, the Victoria's Secret catalog was like, JCPenney was like plausible deniability, right? Like if you look at Victoria's Secret, that's like, you're sinning on purpose. But
my mom figured out the JCPenney catalog thing, and she started cutting out the swimsuit and underwear pages.
That's so embarrassing.
I just felt like so ashamed when I opened one day and all of those pages were missing. I'm like, she's on to me.
But she never mentioned it. It was just no conversation about it.
Oh, don't acknowledge.
God.
Yeah. That's definitely like my background too. Was just immense feelings of like shame and guilt and stuff attached to sexuality. Meanwhile, you have like this teenage biological impulse, right, to just get the poison out,
Yeah.
And nobody at my school or none of my friend group really like nobody talked about that stuff because there was so much shame and guilt tied to it. And so like I really thought I was the only one dealing with all of that. And I think that was that was probably the worst part, was just like I remember finally like one of my friends kind of confiding in me that he was having troubles with like lust or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, there's two of us? Like, two in the same place?
Oh my God. It must be a spirit of lasciviousness that was oppressing that place.
Pressing through your ACE school.
Yeah. Oh
so many floor-length denim skirts,
Hey, a little ankle goes a long way.
Yeah. All right, Micah, I gotta ask actually, I really want to know why you're in seminary still, but before we get to that, why when was this shift? When was this admission of atheism? Is this a more recent thing, or is this
like 2.5 years?
Okay.
There's a couple episodes on my podcast where I like tell the whole story, and I'm not trying to like plug my podcast, but I'm
Plug your
trying
podcast. That's definitely okay to do.
Existential Happy Hour episode 2 is called I Didn't Lose My Faith, and I kind of tell my story. And then somewhere around episode 10 or 11 is called Giving Up for Lent, and I go really into the detail of like the kind of the turning point. So it's like a couple hours if you want to really hear it. I think a lot of people identify with it, but like 2.5 years ago, I was in church and I was really just struggling to believe, but trying so hard to believe. And through a combination of some conversations that I had in therapy and some things that were said in a sermon and just kind of my own tug at my heart, even though I don't really believe there's like a man in the sky with a beard who tugs at my heart, like our hearts are drawn towards things. And it was just like I had this growing realization that freedom lied on the other side of Christianity for me, and that like maybe it was okay to stop, because I'd been like in and out, like maybe I love Jesus but hate the church, or I love Jesus but I'm not a Christian, Jesus but and like all this stuff, and help my unbelief. I'd been praying that fucking prayer for like 10 years, and I tried so hard, and it was just kind of this like, what if you stop trying? Like, what if you just let it go as an experiment, like just see what would happen? And so that was 2.5 years ago. And I had this moment where I broke up with Jesus at a Ash Wednesday service in Lent 2019. And I was like, Jesus, just like no hard feelings, but I don't really feel like you are real. I don't feel like you love me that much. I feel like I'm faking it when I say that I love you. Like, let's just take a break. And then if you want to be with me, you know where to find me. And then he didn't say anything else after that. So then I enrolled in seminary because I was like, well, we still got to fucking make meaning. And I'm a spiritual person, theologically interested. And I want to figure out what the fuck was going on with all that Christianity for the first 30 years of my life. And so then I enrolled in seminary, and I was like, I don't believe in Jesus, but I still believe in the universe is love and God, blah, blah, blah. And then I got into theology classes and was like, oh shit, this is just up. So it was kind of during my first year at seminary. And it's still like, I'm not an adamant, like angry atheist, like, oh, Christians are stupid, or, God is a delusion or whatever. I'm like, again, it was an experiment. It's like, what if we take out the idea of a supernatural loving creator and just try to live without that for a while and see if it makes sense, see if it feels right, see if I feel a sense of connection, see if my heart is well, see if I have the peace that passes understanding, like all this shit, right? And so I did, and I have, and it's been dope. And the reason I'm still at seminary is because even though I don't believe in a God who is a supernatural loving creator, I believe that there's a lot of shit going on, right? And so I'm interested in that. It's like, if not a supernatural loving creator, then what is the universe, and where did it come from, and how do we relate to that in a way that is spiritual, in a way that gives us meaning, in a way that gives us ethics, and that gives us connection to other people and liberation for the oppressed, and all the stuff we were looking for from our supernatural loving creator. I'm now looking for through like other ways of understanding existence and understanding the universe. And I'm very lucky that there's a whole corner of theology that is doing this work and that's asking these questions. And it's not theism, because it's not supernatural loving creator, but there's all these other little like subdivisions of theology that are working with theology after the death of God, and theologies of nature and existential theology. And it's just really exciting. I find so much stimulating stuff from my mind. I'm building great relationships with other people, and it's been really healthy for my soul, for my understanding of myself and my place in the world.
That sounds really interesting. It almost like morphs the concept, like theology, the idea of studying God, into like more of a metaphysical study or an epistemological.
But that's, yes, and so yeah, that's exactly it. So here's how I think about this, right? Because there were two questions I've always had, with like ever since blogging way back in the day. Whenever you read my shit, is like, what is God like? And how do we have a relationship with God? Like, what is the fundamental nature of God? And so like when we were fundamentalists, it was like, God is like, up in the sky with his 10 commandments and don't touch your penis, and he has to punish sins, and he demands a blood sacrifice, and but also he's loving, and also he's kind, and also he's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. So that was very confusing. But then I became a progressive Christian, and God was like, God is like Jesus, and God is with the oppressed, and God is just walking around barefoot doing hippie shit with prostitutes. And it's like, cool, I vibe with that God. And so, but then I was like, those gods are kind of made up, probably, maybe not. But so far, the evidence points to, oh, humans made this up. That's disappointing, but it seems like we have to come to terms with that. But then the question of like, what is God like, and how do we relate to it? And so God has become uh broken down into like there's a few different things that word refers to for me. One is the character in the Christianity, that like the Father. And I understand that now as to be like a mythological character, just like Zeus or any other god that humans created. So we have God the Father, mythological character, and then we have God that we experience as an absence, as like a mystery, like where we hoped to find God, we find only nothing, but it's a mystery that calls to us and draws us in. It's very mystical and very like vibey and woo woo, and all kinds of mystical people throughout the history of all religions have had this like God is a deep mystery beyond words, and I'm down with that. And then there's God that's like, what is ultimate reality? Like, what is that which is without beginning or end? Because that should be called God, right? If there's something that is self-existent, that should be called God. And so then it's like, well, maybe we can call the universe God and relate to it as ultimate, because it seems to be like the universe seems to be self-existent, like uncreated, without beginning or end, the source of our life, the ground of our being, all this stuff. And it's like,
Yeah,
if we
yeah,
turn our attention away, and some of the devotion that we gave to this mythological character called God from the Bible, and instead we make existence and the universe our God and relate to that, and you lose a lot, because the universe doesn't give a shit about you. It's the universe doesn't have a plan for your life. The universe doesn't care if you drowned or not. And yet you gain something by, you're no longer alienated from this, because you're interacting with something real. You're interacting with something that is as near as your own breath and as real as the ground you stand on. And there's no division between natural and supernatural, and there's no division between God and everything else. And it's just like, it's a great like homecoming to your own existence. And so we can use the word God to talk about that. We can also not use the word God to talk about that, because it has a lot of religious baggage. And then we can argue about that a lot in seminary. It's like, are we going to use the word God or not? But we're still asking the same questions, as like, what is ultimate reality and how do we relate to it? And I no longer think that it's a Hebrew man in the sky with a beard who did the Noah's Ark and all that shit, right? God the Father from the Bible stories. But there is an ultimate reality, and I do want to relate to it. And so here I am in seminary asking questions.
Okay. I feel like there's a bunch of ways. That brings up a lot of things that I really, God, this is fun. Okay. So ultimate reality, God, I've noticed the shift in liberal Christianity. So you talk about debating whether or not you can use the word God or not. So that's probably the direction that I'm taking this in a little bit. So, but as someone who's kind of when shifting to liberal Christianity, being very aware of what liberal Christianity is doing, the word like ultimate reality is often defaulted to as an explanation for what God is. They'll be like God or ultimate reality. Like they'll use both in order to make a connection to something, to delineate their understanding of God from guy in the sky.
Right.
Anthropomorphize figures. So do you think that when you start doing all this parsing out, right, when you say ultimate reality versus God and what is God like? Well, I think God's like Jesus. Why? Because you're making that, like, you're using your experience and your understanding and your connection to ultimate reality to make judgment calls on what you think that is like and how we think we should move as people in this earth who are all interconnected. So when you're talking about Jesus and you're saying, I think God's like that, and on the limited information that we have that allows you to hold that mystery, right? Like, do you think that that's just at that level, you've just moved away from Christianity as a whole, and that you're just mincing words, or you're trying to connect to something that is meaningful to you because you have maybe a historical connection to it, or like, because you'll have a lot of people who are saying that is emphatically not Christianity. Hence the Gospel Coalition writing books about how those people are all shitheads. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on all of that?
So there's a lot going on, and I think that what you said is for sure part of it, that I think people want to maintain a connection. Um, in economics, there's the idea of the sunk cost fallacy, right? Where you like pay $1,000 to fix up a shitty car because you already paid $1,000 to fix up a shitty car, and you'll like you'll waste more money because you already wasted some money. And it's a thing that
Yeah.
humans do because our brains are not good at making economic decisions. And I feel like there's some of that that goes on with Christianity is like, well, we've already invested so much as a culture and as a denomination and as a church, as an individual, like believing in the Jesus or believing in the Bible. So rather than being like, you know what, fuck it, this Bible is an old busted car, it's not getting us where we want to go. We're just like, well, let's fix it up. Let's rehab it one more time. Like take it in the shop and see if we can get it to fucking run without homophobia this time, right?
I'm feeling attacked. I'm feeling attacked.
I mean, I spent
we didn't
years
establish a safe word, but we
I spent years doing this, so I don't want to judge, but I think that I could say for me, from my experience,
you're
that was
fine.
for sure part of it was like, and then I wanted to go to church because the people I knew were at church and it was familiar, and so I wanted a way to have the familiarity of that without having all the problems of it. So I think that that's one thing that motivates people to do it. I think also a lot of people genuinely do have meaningful, positive experiences of Jesus. And I can't shit on that or take that away because my experience of Jesus was like occasionally meaningful, most of the time, very aware that I was the one doing the heavy lifting. Like if I stop imagining this relationship, it's going to stop. That was my sense of it.
his
So
yoke wasn't as light as you were told it was.
not, my God. And I spent so much time. Oh shit. That's like such a throwback because, there was, I went through this phase in college where I was like, help my unbelief, help my unbelief, help my unbelief. And I had on my computer desktop a picture of this dude who was like dressed up as Jesus. And I was, because I really wanted to like imagine what it was like to be in a relationship with Jesus, the man, like the God in human form. So I had like a photograph of this actor dressed as Jesus. And I put that Bible verse next to him in from the message of like, are you tired, worn out, burned on religion? Come to me and I will give you rest. Like whatever, it was from the message, the version of that, take my yoke upon me and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart and you will find rest for your soul. And I just like tried to jam that shit into my brain. Like if I repeat this enough, I will experience it. And I didn't ever experience it. So for me, that's a big part of why, it was more of a relief than a tragedy to let go of Jesus, is because it had been so much work to try to experience that when it wasn't really what I was experiencing. That didn't answer your question at all, but that was something else I said. So there you go.
I'm
No,
with you
that's great,
100% there, though, because I felt that same sense of relief when I was like, I can finally just not care about this. It's like when you've been on like a strict diet for like 2 months,
Yep.
and then you're so sick of it that you just go have like a normal meal, and you're like, I just want to not care that this is not the way it's supposed to, like that.
Yeah.
I just want to be devoid of those feelings of like, I'm doing this wrong, there's something wrong, because I think
Yep.
there's talking about the comfort aspect of things, there's definitely like a fundamentalist rationality loop that people fall into, where it's like another thing that is comforting to people in a lot of ways is like, you explain away that lack of meaning, the lack of feeling like you have that relationship and that connection and stuff. You can always explain that away as like, well, I'm just not doing this in a pure enough form for it to work. It's not working for me because I have doubts and because I'm not totally dedicating my life to God, and I'm not fasting or whatever. There's
Yep.
so many different forms that it can take, but there's always like 30 reasons why it's your fault that this isn't
Always
working
your
right.
fault, man. That is exactly it. And I've said that 100 times to people, because folks who are like kind of on that edge of like, do I believe or not? I'm like, did it work for you? And they're like, well, no. And I was like, but they're like, but it's my fault. I'm like, yeah, they tell everyone that.
It's always your fault, man.
And
It's like when you get into like extreme political beliefs too. It's like you get somebody who's a hardline right winger in office that can just kind of like fast track his agenda, and when things go awry, It's like,
Oh
well,
yeah. Yep.
we put in more conservative policies, but they weren't like purely capitalistic policy. We still have a handicapped market, and that's why this didn't work the way it was supposed to. You know.
Yeah, and the only answer that the Christians had was like try harder and do more. It's like, have you tried fasting for 5 days? Have you tried memorizing the entire book of John? Have you tried going to a 24-hour prayer thing in fucking Kansas City? Have you like tried not having
Ugh.
sexuality? Have you tried not having desires? Have you tried not having money? And it's just like all this shit until you like carve away your entire humanity. And what's so funny now is like I tried just about every shit. And folks now come on my Instagram and be like, bro, the problem is you just don't know the true gospel of Jesus. Like, read the book of John, bro. I'm like, I will quote the book of John to you, man. Like, I know for sure I know more about the Bible than you. And I don't mean disrespect. It's just like I jam that shit into my head trying to feel something. And they're like, well, you just need to ask God to give you great. I'm like, oh, I need to ask God what? You tell me, because I will pull out my fucking prayer journal from 2005 and I will send you a screenshot of the page where I ask God for grace or ask God for faith or ask God to like, please don't let me doubt, or please don't let this be lukewarm, or please like, and it's like, I ask God every fucking thing. If God don't want to answer that shit, that's not my problem. Like and Martin Luther was like, it's grace, bro. It's like, we can't save ourselves. I'm like, if I'm not saved, whose fucking fault is that then? That's not on me. That's on God. I'm done. For real.
Dude, there isn't a single Instagram, Twitter, whatever. There's not a single account on social media that when they post something like that's inflammatory, poking fun at that. I mean, it's always a personal attack to them. Like if you get it, you get it, and you realize like you get the humor behind it. But if you're still in that, it's like it feels like a personal attack. And there's always those people who are like, well, I mean, if you really seek God, you'll find him.
Right.
That's what you want to say right here, right now, in front of all these people. Like that's what you think, and I mean, like you said, there's like the amount that they'll just push into the idea that if you try, it's like you just want to ask them, what does trying look like to you?
Just have faith, bro. You just gotta really mean it when you pray. You just gotta really ask Jesus to show himself to you, and I promise you, he will, bro. I promise.
Yeah. If you were really approaching this with a spirit of like of servitude, really seeking the truth, like these JC Petty catalog girls, they wouldn't be an issue for you. You wouldn't care that they were there.
Right.
You wouldn't have a problem thinking about that. It's like you want that so bad.
Yeah.
So that you can just not feel like a piece of garbage.
Right.
And it just never happens.
And you know what it boils down to is like, if you didn't have a brain and you didn't have sexuality and you didn't have a body, then you would be a perfect Christian. It's like it's your fucking brain and your brain and your dick that makes you not able to be a good Christian. And it's like, who gave me this brain and this dick? Like God put me in a human thinking body. I have desires, I have sexual urges, I have a feeling of pleasure and sensation of interacting with the world that brings me joy. And I have a rational mind that seeks to understand. And if God did not want to be known through a mind and a body with thoughts and desires, then he should have fucking redeemed some other species, because this is how he made us. And like, if you're a good father, how are you going to make your children to have brains and penises and then be like, I'm going to send you to hell for having thoughts and lust? That's just stupid.
If you just let Jeffrey Dahmer lobotomize you with a drill bit from Sears.
Oh my God.
Gone.
You'll be saved.
Gone.
Salvation is through Jeffrey Dahmer alone. Is that what you're saying, Casey?
It's
Jeffrey Dahmer is my savior. Yes.
Because they're like, God wants to have a relationship with humanity, but don't act like a fucking human.
To be clear, Micah, he didn't make things that way.
Right.
A woman did that to all of us. I just want to be very clear that if a woman wasn't hungry for an apple, we wouldn't be in this position. So I don't know. What do you have to say to that?
I think that's just such a fucking stupid story. I get so irritated with this when they're like, well, God couldn't help it. Like, God did the best that he could. And God made the world to be like freedom, because freedom and love, and you can't have love without freedom. And then we fucked it up because we chose to sin. It's like, were we able to choose not to sin, really? Like, were we able to? Like, because God for sure had the option, if you think that God is all fucking powerful and bigger than the galaxies and all that shit, like God could have thought of the rules of the world wherein you could have free will and love without this excessive suffering and sin. Like he could have thought of it. He could have been smart. And like we're going to dunk on C.S. Lewis again real quick, because in Chronicles of Narnia with the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the lion is like, sorry, I gotta die because the ancient magic written before time says that, you know, if I die, I can buy Edward back from this witch. And sorry. And that word is not aligned with my values. I don't know why it came out of my mouth. So anyways,
I mean, it aligns with, I don't
She
know if it
wasn't
aligns
cool.
with my values. If it's gender neutral, it's fine. If you meant it gender neutrally,
well, I was
there's no
referring to
issues with it.
Satan. I was referring to Satan, so I think it should be okay.
And Satan's
But
a
anyways,
bitch. We know Satan's a bitch.
But like, who wrote the deep magic to which God is constrained? Like, if you think your God is all powerful, and then you're like, God couldn't do it any other way, I'm like, get out of here. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
God really likes fantasy. What else do you need? He likes fantasy stories, and he gave us one.
Yeah. That's like the existence of Lucifer is such a weird conundrum. Like, you know, even if he was to give man free will, like, why did he allow this like rogue entity to like tempt them? It just, all of it is like so ridiculous. And then,
right,
you know, when you get into the redemption side of it, like there's, like you said, God requires this blood sacrifice to purge sin. You know, it's like, did God make these rules, or is he just stuck with them, or does he just like, he's just horny for roasted animals, or, you know?
Yeah,
there's just so many things that it's like, why?
Yeah. And you know, the progressive Christians, like, bless their hearts, are like, well, that's not what God's like, bro. God's like Jesus, and God was just doing his best, man. He's sad. But when you, and it's like, that's not really a satisfying answer to me. That just, it was not satisfying. So then when I got into seminary and was like, why is God like this? And then I was like, oh, because people invented God, and this is what the weather was like in Mesopotamia, and this is how cause and effect was understood in a pre-scientific world. Okay, this makes a lot more sense. And I'm not saying it's the right answer. Like, for sure, I'm not going to be like, oh, atheists know everything and religious people are stupid. I'm just saying, for me, it's an explanation that I don't have to struggle so hard to believe. And so because I'm not constantly at war with my own brain, I have a lot more peace.
Do you ever wonder, like, because obviously the stuff that comforts other people or appears to comfort other people, like we've been talking about, doesn't comfort you, doesn't comfort me. Do you ever wonder if, like, if circumstances were different, if your life had gone a different direction, would you need that comfort enough to find it? Like, you know, my dog died suddenly, like a couple years ago, and it like messed me up for months. And it made me really realize, like, I've never experienced loss. Like, I've never had anyone close to me die.
Right.
I've never needed that comfort the way that other people need it. And again, like, we've been dunking on Christians and stuff for this. I'm all for people finding whatever comfort they can in whatever, you know, just don't bother other people with it all the time. But I sometimes wonder, like, do I just have the luxury of not needing this because of how my life has gone thus far?
I think that's a super healthy question to ask. And I think it's a valid critique that sometimes people raise against folks who advocate for atheism, is like, well, you know, yeah, you don't know suffering, you don't know oppression. And especially if you're like a middle class white guy and telling like Black Christians, like, oh, your God is not real. Like, you know, you don't know what it's like to try to experience that, and why it might be, there might be a reason that they say God is on the side of the oppressed, even though you can sit back here and go, ho, 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 no, he's not, you know, whatever. So I think that question is helpful. However, I think that there are a lot of other people who have been in contexts of oppression. And I look to Black theologians and I look to feminist theologians who are saying, like, no, our traditions of believing in redemptive suffering, or our traditions of believing that God is on the side of the oppressed, have brought us comfort at the expense of our dignity. And they have kept us under the heel of the oppressors, and they have sanctified the actions of the oppressors as the will of God. And so there are people who are not just comfortable, privileged, middle class white guys or whatever naming this stuff. I think also it could go the other way. Like, I think that if I didn't have all this religious trauma, I might be able to just vibe with Jesus. And if I hadn't been abused for like 20 years of my life in the name of Jesus in the Bible, like a lot of progressive Christians are like, Jesus is cool and the Bible is cool. I'm like, how could you say that? And they're like, nobody ever hurt me with those things. And it's like, yeah, because we were taught to like it, the expectations of what we're given were so high of like, you will know that you know that you know that if you died tonight, you will go to heaven. And I think that for people who are like raised in liberal Christianity are just like, you'll vibe with the Bible and love your neighbor. And they're like, okay, that's fine. But because we were given like the bar was so high of like, if Christ is not resurrected, then we are of all men most miserable. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. Like they raised the stakes and we're like, it's all or nothing, bro. And so then we're like, then it's probably nothing. I'm sorry to say it. But I'm fine with that because it's like the prophet Elijah. And this is what I want to say to everybody who's like, just believe in Jesus, just try real hard. God still loves you. Jesus is still reaching out for you. You're going to realize someday that this, you're worshiping nature, but really Jesus is the one who loves you. And I'm like, fine. Like Elijah and the prophet of Baal, let's fucking get up on a mountain and see whose God is real. And what did Elijah do before he did it? He went and he got the water and he poured the 7 barrels of water and he like soaked everything. It was like, we're going to make sure that if fire consumes this altar, it's nobody's going to know, like nobody's going to question that it's supernatural. And that's what I'm doing. Like being a fucking atheist theologian is my 7 barrels of water on the altar. And I'm like, I'm going to read all the fucking atheist theology, all the science and metaphysics and all the reasons why everything I believe was bullshit. And if God wants to, like, here I am. Like God could at any time drive me to my knees and be like, I am here, my son, it is I. And if I believe it in my heart, I will believe it. I will come and be like, I was wrong. I got saved again. Big time. It'll be great. I'll get a fucking book deal. I'll probably be a megachurch pastor. I'd be so fucking loaded. It'd be fantastic.
I
you need one of those stories though. Like you need to get in a car accident and be like, I was dead for 30 seconds and it felt like 2 years.
But I'm not going to fake it. Like I'm not going to fake it. So if God wants to show up and be supernatural and be like, no, it was me, then I'm down. I just got to say.
It seems like a mistake.
Okay, what you just said is definitely going to stick with me for a while and I'll probably repeat it to people. And I'll give you credit for it, I promise. But the idea that like what you're that your life, that anyone's life, that anyone, like everyone, Christians want you to find a way to make it work. And you comparing just your life and anyone's life, anyone who's dealing with it, anyone who's walking away from it, it's like comparing that to the 7 barrels of water, I think is one of the coolest metaphors that I've heard in a really long time.
Because like, I think about this all the time where in the Old Testament, it was like, let's see whose God is real. And the God who is real was just like, boom, no question, burn your shit up. Everybody's running scared, right? And the gods who are fake were like, the priests of the gods who were fake were like jumping around and like doing shit and like cutting themselves. And like, and then Elijah was mocking him. Maybe your God's sleeping. Maybe he's like not there, right? And now the roles are reversed where like, the people who claim that their God is real are cutting their humanity off, right? Like cutting their own brains out in order to keep believing. And it's like, where's your God? Oh, well, his ways are higher than our ways. And so we taunt them like, what, is he sleeping? Oh, he works on his own time. Sometimes God's answer to prayer is not yet. And it's like, but where is he? Where's the fucking dude? And it's just like, oh, he's just not here. He'll show up at any moment. And it's like, okay, now you guys look like fools. Like you're the prophet of Baal here. And I'm sorry, but it's your own story. So, what are you going to do about it? You shouldn't have taught me so much fucking shit in Sunday school. Now I can't be stopped.
Dude, I love the idea of the practitioners of Baal, like giving those same reasons to the priests about why it didn't work and why Baal didn't deliver him. Like, well, I don't know, man. Did you try fasting? Like, are you really, do you really want to see Baal at work in your life? Or do you...
or bro, he's totally at work in your life. You just can't see it. There's a metaphorical fire consuming this altar right now. And someday you'll realize that it was real.
Well, I saw that you burned the McPherson's baby, but did you burn your baby?
Right. Yes. Burn one more baby. The first baby, you didn't really mean it hard enough.
Right.
Anybody can burn one baby. Come on, man. You know,
Right. If you're really
put
sold
your
out for
faith on the
Christ.
line.
Yeah. And that's what it's like. And, it's easy to make fun of the prophets of Baal for burning babies, but, the amount of abuse of children it's the same thing, man. They just didn't burn us literally, but they fucking destroyed our psyches trying to get us to be molded, conformed to the image of his son.
Yeah.
Sorry to be fucking dark on your jokes about baby sacrifice.
Hey,
you really took my dead babies in a dark direction.
This is 2021 post-Christian version of dead baby jokes. So we're back. We've made it back to high school.
Cause a wheel.
Okay. You said something I want to call back to a little bit and then hear your thoughts on it, Micah. Because you mentioned, which I agree, when you're talking about, people in the ancient Near East looking at it's like trying to make sense of what's going on around them. So it's like there's a localized flood and all different religions kind of like, or I don't even know if they were established religions at that point when the narratives were introduced, but basically you end up with different flood stories. So it's everyone just like looking at their even most of the Bible is people looking at their circumstances and reinterpreting it which is why you don't see consistency through it, despite what we were taught. And that's interesting, historically speaking, and looking at the way that humans throughout history have tried to relate their story to something meaningful.
Yeah.
And I feel like what happens when you start, when people start making comments about, they just believe this at that time. I don't remember who coined the term, and you might have the name in your belt, but chronological snobbery is the word that gets thrown around a lot. Like, you think you're so enlightened because we live now and we can look back on these things and we can shit on a bunch of people who didn't think the way we did. But what I find meaningful, and maybe you find something similar, which is why you're in seminary, when you look at history, human history, biblical history, and you look at the way people were trying to take their circumstances and reinterpret it and constantly relate it to something that gave them hope, gave them meaning, gave them purpose. That's literally what all of us are always trying to do. And it's like, to me, it doesn't feel like a dig at anything. It feels like this is human. This is what we do, and we'll never stop. And in 150 years, people are going to look back on us having this conversation and be like, these guys were just trying to do the exact same fucking thing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And there's this term that I've learned in seminary called homo religiosus that's used to describe homo sapiens. They say we should be called homo religiosus because being religious is perhaps the fundamental distinction about our species, is that this is what we do. We try to make meaning. And yeah, I mean, I see myself in standing in a great line of heritage with the ancient mystics and prophets and the people who ask questions of the night sky. And I don't want to be chronologically snobberish. Here is where I think the problem is I think that each generation, each iteration of humanity is responsible to do the best they can with what they have. And so 150 years from now, if there's still a few post-apocalyptic survivors wandering around with their holographic Bluetooths listening to this old podcast on the scorched out earth, I hope that they can look at me and say he was doing the best he could with the information he had at the time. And then I hope that they have better information and that they do better, and we build on it. So the problem is, and this is why, like, I'm not chronologically snobberish, but I think that if you get new information and you refuse to adjust your model, then you cross over into idolatry, right? Because you're worshiping a God that's made in your image and it's not fucking real. It has no power to save. And you see all these thresholds of history where human knowledge has expanded and rubbed up against religious models of the world. And the religious models have resisted and resisted and resisted, and then eventually shifted to change. So like in the ancient Near East, you had the firmament model with the waters below and the waters above, and then God, or the gods, whatever. A lot of them were polytheist, and then the Hebrews were like, no, we're going to blend them all in and make them one God. Great, but it was all the same cosmological model: flat Earth, waters below, dome above, right? And then the Greeks were like, no, it's concentric spheres, and so then they were like, from Greeks until Middle Ages, they were like, the earth is the center of the world, and God is like, there's all these spheres of the earth, and then the moon, and then the planets, and then the stars. But just outside of the stars is God and the heavens, and God sustaining it all, right? And so at each of these points, science has threatened religion because religion has been unwilling to adapt. So when Galileo and his fucking telescope homies came through and were like, bad news, guys, we're not the center of the universe, the church was like, kill them, because they couldn't adapt their model of God to incorporate the new information that we have about the world. And so then eventually we reluctantly did. And they were like, okay, no, it's like, it's a big galaxy, but God made this whole fucking galaxy. And then Einstein comes along and is like, nope, time is actually pretty wobbly. And then Darwin comes along and is like, actually, here's all this evidence for how this shit works. And then cosmologists come along and they're like, dark matter, dark energy, quantum molecules, all this shit. I mean, Christians are still doing the same thing now that the Roman Catholic Church did in the 1600s or whatever, and are like, fucking kill the evolutionists, except we don't actually kill them, but we want to, like, say, discredit them by being like, oh, they're just horny and they want to get rid of God so they can have sex. Forgetting that you can have sex as a Christian and be a hypocrite about it. Just fucking paint a redemption story and it'll be fine. You'll get a second church gig. It'll be great.
Yeah, sometimes with a teenager.
Right. Oh my God. So that's the problem, is like, when we aren't willing to adapt our models and we say, no, we have to ignore this information, suppress this information because it threatens our model of God. I think instead we should be willing to let our models of God and our models of reality shift and change and grow as our understanding grows. Otherwise, I think it becomes an alienating force. I think when you cling to your idea of God so tightly that you are unwilling to accept the information about the reality in which we live, then it starts to like pull you in half. And that's when you get that help my unbelief prayer. Because if your beliefs were not founded on things that contraindicate that contradict the facts of the universe, then you wouldn't need to pray help my unbelief. You could just believe. And unlike those who advocate for blind faith, I don't think that it's morally good to believe things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't think Elijah would want me to either. He'd be like, no, which God has the fire? Worship that one. I
think what's really cool about what you're saying is like, so when I was mentioning chronological snobbery, I feel like that's the accusation that's always hurled at maybe a postmodernist or just anyone who's talking about any sort of change, right? So then you have, but even you just doing that, like a little quick brief history of religious institution thought and the way that they control academia for a very long time and throughout history, and were, the kind of the major source of information. It was like, they're kind of like, those are the institutions that are really guilty of chronological snobbery, despite hurling those accusations at anybody that wants to progress with new information, because what they're trying to do is saying, we are the ones that have arrived in light of everything that's in our past, and they're unable to adapt.
Oh man, that is such a good point. And I think there may be a lot of projection going on, that for sure it's like our revealed knowledge of God is the finished product.
Yeah.
And so everything else has to.
That's like the height of human arrogance. It's like,
it really is. It's so silly. It's so silly. It's very silly that they think it's not arrogant.
We've talked about it a couple of times on here, but I bought on eBay some of my old school books, because I went to like a really hardcore conservative Christian school that used this like accelerated Christian education curriculum.
Oh yeah, I know about ACE.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Oh, of course I do. Yeah, from my time in the cult.
Did you go to an ACE school?
I did not. I was straight homeschooled. But when I was like 20, I was a mentor working with troubled youth. And by that, I mean like 13-year-olds who said swear words and smoked weed, which like 13 is probably too young to be smoking weed. But I don't know how troubled these youths were. I mean, most of them probably just had ADD, honestly. Christianity didn't know what to do with them. But I was working with troubled youths, so-called, as a 19-year-old working with like younger teenagers. And ACE was the program that we had to like make them do.
Oh, well, that's good for them.
I'll cure all their problems. They turned out great.
Dude, the exact history that you just laid out was laid out in this science book that I bought. It talks about all that stuff, like Christian leaders, killing scientists and stuff that propose new ideas and stuff. And then it all concludes with this passage that's like, if science contradicts the Bible, then it's got to be thrown out. Obviously, it's not real. It literally just makes the case for the exact same logic that they used against, that they just lambasted, using against Galileo and stuff.
Couldn't be us. Yeah. It was, man, there was that debate like 6 years back with Mr. Who's the science guy that all the people like?
Bill Nye and
Bill Nye.
Ken Ham. Are we
Bill
doing
Nye,
this?
Ken Ham. Yeah.
We were at Liberty University when that happened, so that was definitely like at least 10 years ago. And I remember that being the talk of the town.
Oh my God!
By town, I mean our Christian circles. Talking about who actually won that debate.
But I remember that, like, Bill Nye asked Ken Ham, like, what would change your mind? Like, what data would cause you to change your mind? And Ken Ham was like, there could be none. Like, there is
none data.
Right. Like, there is nothing. And it's like, at that point, for me, that's such a red flag of like, if nothing could show you that what you are believing is false, how do you know what you're believing is true? And it takes me back to those early days of evangelism when Ray Comfort and like Ray Comfort wannabes would come around and be like, we're going to teach you how to evangelize people. Like, go up to strangers on the street and be like, if you died right now, would you go to heaven? And then people are like, oh, I don't know. How could you possibly know? And then you're like supposed to get them to tell you all their religious beliefs. And then your like sales pitch line is like, if you were wrong, would you want to know? And that's when you bust open the Romans road. Romans 3:23, for all of sin and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 6:23, wages of sin is death, give God eternal life, Jesus Christ alone. And boom, you're off. You're going to get those people saved. You're going to get a notch in a belt, crowns in heavens, mansions for everybody. It's going to be lit. But it was that question of like, if you were wrong, would you want to know? And that's the question that I have for people like Ken Ham and like my former self and like all these people who are adamant that like it couldn't be anything other than the Bible. It's like, if you were wrong, would you want to know? How would you know? Because if you wouldn't want to know if you were wrong, then you're just believing made up shit. And that's fine. You can believe made up shit like Santa Claus. Go for it. I don't give a fuck. But if it causes you to hurt other people or if it causes your own soul to have anguish, like let it go, man. You can let it go.
You can believe it because circulatory reasoning works. You just
God moves in mysterious ways.
That's our first T-shirt.
The mysterious ways in which God works is just circular reasoning.
Exactly.
It's good because God did it. How do you know it's good? Because God did it. How do you know God is good? Because he did good shit.
Because God is good. God is good all the time, right? Is that that's the congregation after the past?
God, oh my God! But you know what's so crazy about that is when I hear that, I'm like, oh man, we were self-brainwashing ourselves. Like we had to talk ourselves into, and I think of that song, like, you're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. And it's like, oh, you were like, when we sing this stuff, we're like trying to like fucking keep these thoughts in our head. God is good all the time. God is good. And it's just like, it's short circuits thought and it short circuits analysis by just causing us to like repeat these thoughts until they become brainwashing. I mean, even like a little baby singing Jesus loves me, this I know, first song that Christians learn. How do you know it? For the Bible tells me so. How do you know the Bible's true? Because it just is. Fucking don't ask questions. You're 4 years old, right? But that's where it starts. And like from the time we're toddlers, we like auto brainwash ourselves. So by the time you're 25 or 30 and you start asking these questions, it feels like you're tearing out the entire fucking core of your identity because from the time you knew the English language was used to brainwash you into believing this one particular set of things that can't be threatened by data, like Ken Ham says.
Yeah. One of the things that's wild about it, and I'm only just kind of making this parallel connection now, is, we were talking about this recently on a recent episode, but just how like worship music is centralized around a concept of collectively agreeing that you're all trash, but God loves you.
Oh, and man.
It's, but what's funny is not funny. It's definitely not funny, but look, I didn't internalize a lot of this stuff the same way that some people did. I don't actually feel like I have a lot of religious harm done to me. I got the same message. I just, for some reason, like certain parts of it didn't sink in the same way. And
you know why? Because you were rocky soil.
Yeah.
The seed fell on the hard ground, and no fruit could spring up. I was fertile soil, man. I was going to bring forth 100-fold.
But seems kind of a Pharisee type character.
Yeah, I'm terrible. But what the message is like, look, the message that just general people, liberal people, like maybe even progressive Christians, but like what people want you to get across is you have worth. You have worth because you have breath in them. And I think that there's a message that's what Christians were trying to do without losing this penal substitutionary atonement horse shit. Right. So like what they end up doing is like instead of just saying you have value, they changed it. It's like perverted to this thing that says, you're shitty, but I love you anyway, which is what abusers do. Like that's what abusive men do to women to make 100%. Them not leave them. And that's 100%. Fuck up. That's fucked up.
No one else will ever love you like I do. Oh yeah.
It's god damn. That's terrible.
It's the worst.
This is super happy. I'm glad we're having these. This is some dark shit.
Can we take a hard turn real quick? Because it's been sitting here with this question. Because you mentioned that you came from the same, like, cut from the same cloth as like the Duggars.
Yeah.
Right. So did you mean that in the sense of just like fundamentalism as a whole, or like
no, like they were
same sect?
So there was an organization called Institute in Basic Life Principles. And then it had a lot of names, and all its names were like vague and culty. It was Institute in Basic Life Principles. And then Bill Gothard went around in the 70s and did a bunch of seminars, and everybody in evangelicalism was like, this guy's great. He's doing seminars. It's the 70s. Everybody's having sex. Like, what's going on? It's cultural revolution. And then Bill Gothard was like, the Bible has these principles that if you follow them, you'll have success. And everybody's like, this is fucking great. Thank you. Finally, some stability in our changing world of chaos. And so a lot of people, even like not culty people, like just general, it was fairly well accepted. And he had gone to Wheaton College, and he was like in just like evangelical scene, and people were on board with it. But then he like kept getting more and more like building shit up. And so he started with these week-long seminars, and then he started this program called the Advanced Training Institute of America, ATIA, and then later expanded to Russia, and then it was ATII, Advanced Training Institute International. And that was his homeschool program. So he had this whole fucking homeschool program that was based on wisdom booklets. Wisdom booklets was his curriculum, and they were based on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5. And they were just full of fucking indoctrination about like super conservative fundamentalist ways of being. And then it was like the umbrella of authority where God is the head of man and man's head of woman. And then courtship, where like you don't date until you're ready to get married, and your parents decide like whether or not a spouse is a good match for you, and like all this fucking fundamentalist shit. But it was a whole program with conferences, seminars, materials, books, the whole thing. And the Duggars were in it, and my family was in it. So it was like the same educational program / cult.
Have you ever seen those videos where somebody is like trying to tap a keg and then it pops out and this stuff? That's asking you a question.
Deeper pressure. I have a lot of fucking words inside me.
No, that's interesting though. That's so you
keep asking me these questions that are like hour-long answers. Like I've done like
I love this.
I've written essays about this shit, and I've given interviews for hours. And you ask me this question, it's like, oh man, I got to give this thing like 3 minutes. Let's go.
You have a clip though. It's like really well rehearsed though. That was incredible.
Sam and I mostly talk to each other, so we're used to shallow thoughts.
Oh, don't play yourself like that, man.
Well, so we haven't talked about the Duggar controversy yet. I mean, as in an episode, and I've thought a lot about like what happened during this thing, and I'm not going to pretend to know all the details of like what went on in their family and stuff like that. But it sounds like you have this kid who has serious psychopath vibes. From what I've picked up by listening to some of his stuff, that he's like the one that's involved in politics, and he's given speeches at political rallies. What is it about some of these like extreme conservative, like very strict environments that seems to create It creates a place where abuse can happen.
Oh man, like shit. I really would need an hour to answer that question
You have
completely, but
5 minutes.
Yeah.
let me name
Hang
the
on, I'm
ways.
ready.
The like there's so much. It's the unquestioning yielding to authority, where it's like we trust the Bible without question because God is our authority. We trust the pastor without question. You trust your father without question. Women trust men without question. Children trust their parents without question. Don't trust yourself. Your heart is wicked. Your heart is evil. Like all this stuff just creates this system where it's like trust other people, don't trust yourself, for one, right? And then the fucked up views on sexuality and the body, where it's like a woman has to hide herself so she doesn't cause her brothers to stumble. Unfortunate use of the word brothers to stumble in the
Yeah.
situation of the fucking Duggars. But the
Yeah.
idea is like,
Oof.
but it was there. It was like, and that's what, when we were teenagers in this, it was like they would separate the men and the women, and they'd be like, women, make sure that you like don't allow your shirt to show that you have the body of a woman, otherwise the men will have lust. And it was like, men, if you notice that a woman has boobs, like look away and think dirty, like think about how dirty you are, because that's bad and God will be sad. Like, and so like the fucked up views of like the repressed sexuality, and like there's just, when you have people with shame as a core identity, when you have people who are taught that it is a virtue to unquestionably trust authority, when you have people that are taught that like God wants you to repress your sexuality, like it's going to create a context that's ripe for abuse, and it's just fucked up. And
It's
man,
like it's weird
there's
because
no
it's
way
like
you can be raised in that and turn out okay. There's just like different degrees of fucked up. And I'm not making excuses for Josh Duggar by any means. Like everyone's responsible for their own shit, but also like there's this culture just fucks you up so fucking badly that it's like a miracle that anybody turns out halfway okay who's raised in that.
I think it's like there. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think that environment, it creates a pathway for somebody who has, especially if they're, if Josh has like, psychopathic tendencies, right? He it's a perfect environment for him to use those aspects of the internal culture there to
Yep.
do what he wants. And he's not going to feel bad about it. He doesn't have the feelings that maybe the people around him do of like, I'm dirty and I'm filthy and I shouldn't do this. Maybe he thinks those things out of habit, but like they don't necessarily mean anything, and I'm speculating. But like I think there's something, it's almost like a bottlenecked sexuality in
Oh, for
some of these
sure.
circumstances where like you've got teenagers going through puberty and hormones and all of this kind of stuff, and they're all operating under the assumption that like if you just believe in Jesus and you lean on him and you pray when you're tempted and stuff like that, that all of this can just go away. Like it's we create an environment where there is no sexual temptation whatsoever, and this all just dissipates and goes away. And I feel like if you create an environment where there is no possible okay sexual outlet
Right.
for people,
It's just like wait till you're 25 and married, right?
yeah, it's still coming out, and it's going to come out in weird ways that you don't want,
Yeah, that's
as
exactly
a
it.
parent.
yeah. There's got to be a degree of I don't know. There's got to be a degree because not everyone who grows up in that culture does perverted shit like that. Like you
No.
might develop a kink, but like you're not going to become a pervert in that sense. So like there's a level of I do question it. You know what I would love to see is I don't know if word, but the statistics for like abuse like that within fundamentalism and abuse like that just outside of religion as a whole. Like I don't know how they if it's like a certain percentage of people who are just broken in that way, or if like the fundamentalism emphasizes that, like allows them to pursue those avenues in a way that like they might, like Casey was saying, they might not have been able to be like as a male. You wouldn't be able to be like that, like predator. You wouldn't have the same ability to be the same kind of predator if you didn't have those religious, like strict religious structures to make people fall in line with it. I don't know. I'm always skeptical to say that like does that fundamentalism fuck people up? Yep, we're all here, all having these conversations. Does that fundamentalism create sexual predators in that sense? I don't know if that's like a different mental faculty that's just broken. I really don't know.
Well, I have the same question when I see like hypocritical, narcissistic pastors. And I'm like, did you become a megachurch pastor because you were a hypocritical narcissist? Or did you become a hypocritical narcissist because you were a megachurch pastor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that it's probably best to assume that both are at play. That there are some people who, because of the chemical makeup of their brain or whatever, are more have propensities to, you know, be predatory or to be abusive or to be narcissistic or whatever. But their environments, instead of helping them learn how to be healthy and kind and safe human beings despite whatever challenges they may face because of their brain chemistry, instead their environment exacerbates that and it makes it
Yeah,
way
that's
worse.
such
And
a good
so,
point.
or I think that there can
Celebrates it
be like
too.
a latent sort of thing where it's like you're born with this propensity for this, and if shit goes right it'll never get triggered. But then like if you were put in a shame-based environment and this sexual pressure, then it kind of like activates this thing that's inside of you. And then I don't know, I'm not a fucking psychotherapist, and I'm sure there's people who research this, but it seems from everything that I understand that it's probably safe to bet that some people have tendencies, and then the environments, and certainly the environments of American Christian fundamentalism, makes shit way worse. It
Yeah.
just ruins your mental health. No matter what your starting point is, it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Well, that's a good time as any to wrap things up, right? What a great thing to wrap things up on.
Yeah.
Well, like, thanks be to God who doesn't exist that we're not fucking in that shit anymore, because uh, that's how I look at it. I'm just very, very grateful to have found a different way of being in relationship to the world. That's a
Yeah, it's
happy thing
funny.
for
Well,
me.
that's where Casey's at. It's funny because I still like it's such well, okay, we don't need it. There's no point. This is going to start another conversation, and we've already taken up a bunch of your time. But it is funny when you look at like you know Christianity and the way it works for people and doesn't, and it even as like a reference point. Like sometimes it almost functions as a better cultural reference point than it does like anything else. Like if you can make your philosophy work and you don't have that type of harm to be able to
Yeah.
like operate within it and have a meaningful life through the metaphor of this or that. Like that's I
Yeah.
find that's generally where I find myself at. But
You have no
it's
argument for me on
what
that.
I think is so fun is like when I talk to someone like you and you're using these words and you're creating like you're building a different world around and using different language to communicate your where you're at. It's like, oh, like, but that all resonates with me. So that's like, this is what Casey's banking on, is that this podcast will make me just shed the term altogether. So if maybe you're pulling, you might be evangelizing me away from the word altogether. But
Well, I will say this in closing about being a Christian or not being a Christian. I talk a lot of shit and I enjoy talking and I enjoy ideas, but uh, I don't want to talk anyone out of any spirituality that's life giving for them. And I don't ever want, even though the term atheist probably applies to me, I don't want to ever be an atheist who's like, you're stupid for what you believe, you know, if what you believe is not causing harm. Um, so if Christianity is working for you, if Christianity is giving you life, if you have a relationship with Jesus that's making you kind and giving you hope and you feel connected to the world, like, I don't think it's my place to tell you you're wrong or you're in a bad place. And I'm not interested in arguing to try to convince anyone away from that. Like, if it's working for you, do you all day, like, be cool. And if there's an afterlife, I hope I see you there, put in a good word for me. And if there's not an afterlife, then you and me will both just be fucking compost together. And that's cool too. But where I do want to say is, like, if your religion is causing you harm, if your religion is causing you to do violence to your own soul, if you're feeling that like cognitive dissonance and that anguish and that anxiety and that shame of like, help my unbelief. Why can't I believe? It must be my fault. I need to try harder, do more. If I just do a little bit more, I'll feel it. I don't really feel it yet. And you're like trying to make it work, but it's not working. I want to be like, to that person, I want to be like, let it go.
Yeah.
Like just cut it loose. You don't, if there's a God, you don't have to do all the work of keeping that God alive. Like
Absolutely.
let him die, you know?
Absolutely. Awesome. Micah, thanks so much for handling this. Do you want to, I know you plugged your podcast. I don't know if you have anything else you want to throw out there before we jump off.
Yeah, so I do a lot of stuff on Instagram. That's my favorite place to have these conversations and connect with people and stuff I'm learning and reading about and pictures I take of the trees that I think are divine. So Instagram at Micah J. Murray, MICAHJMURRAY. And then I'm also on Twitter, although that's more of a dumpster fire, but still talking theology. On Twitter at Micah J. Murray. And then, yeah, my podcast, Existential Happy Hour, it's a lot of fun. I'm just talking about this kind of stuff with so many fun people, including well-respectable people, not like myself, academics and shit, people who write seminary books. So Existential Happy Hour, wherever you get your podcasts. And I do work with folks to do deconstruction coaching, whether you are trying to figure out a way to be a Christian that doesn't suck, or if you're finding a way to let go of Christianity that doesn't feel like you're going to fucking die. I help folks move through that. So go on Instagram, send me a message, and I'll talk to you, be able to help folks work with that one-on-one. So that's what I do.
Awesome.
Very cool. Existential Happy Hour.
It's not always happy, but it's always existential. That's what I say.
And is it an hour? No.
It's usually pretty close. It's usually pretty close.
You know, some podcasts are an hour. Oops.
That's fine. People on road trips need something to listen to. Hopefully we've given them an earful today.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.